You know, that concept is sound, it is basic, it is valid. In all candor, however, I cannot claim credit for its origin. Just among us, one brother to another, in the intimacy of this room, if you write about leadership, and if you talk about mentoring, and if you have a sense of history, now you need a sense of history. Coming up with anything new or novel is virtually impossible. You know, the first time I heard that concept expressed, the principle expressed about a small room, was a meeting of a large financial holding company once again, many years ago, and the real star of the meeting was a person I had heard about all of my life, but I never met him. The man's name was Arthur Morris. Let me tell you about Arthur Morris. My parents loved Arthur Morris. They didn't know Arthur Morris either, but they loved Arthur Morris. They would describe Arthur Morris as the great visionary banker from Virginia. You see, it was Arthur Morris who, during a terrible period in this great nation of ours, during the Depression, it was Arthur Morris, the visionary, who said, you know, I believe a legitimate function of a commercial bank should be to loan money to people whose only collateral in many instances is good character. And the only collateral my parents ever had in all too many instances was an abundance of good character. And here I had an opportunity to be with the great man himself, who at that particular time chronologically was up in years, probably in his middle or late 80s, yet he was still the head of a huge financial empire. And Mr. Morris got up before a room full of leaders, people like yourself, you're leaders, group full of CEOs, each a president of a bank. And he said, this has not been a particularly good year. He said, our business is becoming more intricate, more complex, more competitive, and especially more global. You ready for the date? 1963. He said, if we are to succeed, we better determine right now that we can no longer afford the luxury. He called it the luxury. We can no longer afford the luxury of a single satisfied customer. And the minute he said that, the man sitting next to me, CEO of a bank in Knoxville, Tennessee, his observation, Mr. Morris is getting senile. No more satisfied customers. What is he talking about? Let me assure you, there was nothing at all wrong with Mr. Morris. Mr. Morris said, if we are to succeed, if we are to be the best, if we are to compete globally, we better determine right now that the only type of customer we want is one who is pleased. And then I heard it. He said, you please me as a customer, you're going to make money, you will add me to your sales force at no additional cost to you. Now I'm sure you recognize, because you're smart, that this is easier said than done. Let's take a look at some of the changes I've noted over the years. You know, when I first started teaching at the collegiate level, I'd walk into a college classroom. Almost 80% of my students were male. 95% of my students expected to go to work for a given organization and remain there for 25, 30, or 40 years and then retire with a stereotypical gold watch. Today I walk into that same classroom, and in many instances, well over 70% of my students are women, and very few expect to remain with any organization for more than a few years. Do you know why? Look around. You've seen mothers and fathers and friends and associates downsized, right-sized, re-engineered out of jobs. And by the way, take a look at the organizations that have gone through this process. And in all too many instances, what they're doing after is precisely what got them into trouble before. except with fewer people. So what's going on right now is the corporate equivalent of taking steroids. Short-term gain. Long-term, we are already beginning to pay one horrendous price in terms of loyalty, in terms of dedication, in terms of commitment. Now, what are some of the other changes? Well, everything today is global. Everything today. It's no longer a matter of choice. You know, at one time you heard a professor tell you, well, we want a strong country, buy American. I don't even know what this is. I have no idea what it means to buy American. The BMW I saw parked outside was manufactured in Greer, South Carolina. I can assure you, if you had to take every piece of clothing that you're wearing right now that was made in a foreign country and place it right here in front of me, this might not be a pretty scene. But everything today is global. You want to know where your competition is coming from? I'll tell you where it's coming from. It's coming from India, it's coming from China, it's coming from Africa, it's coming from Europe. You've got to be able to compete with the biggest and the best anywhere in the world. Anywhere in the world. Now, having said that, what type of leadership does it take? I should indicate that there is, and I better indicate this because it's so important, it's so critical. One other change. I noticed during the 1990s, many of my students, particularly at the MBA level, we'd break out into groups and we'd analyze cases. But many of these students indicated to me that they felt the real sin. From a behavioral perspective, the real sin was not committing the deed. But the real sin was being what? Stupid enough to get caught. Now you tell me, how are you going to build an organization that's competitive, that is ethical, with that type of mentality? What type of leadership does it take?